What's up, y'all? What's good? Welcome to the What Up Doe Show. It's your boy Dame D, and I am back with another one. What's good, y'all? What's good? It's Freestyle Friday. Chop it up. We're gonna have a good conversation tonight. I'm gonna wait for and I see I spelled the little thing wrong. I gotta go change my title. I misspelled that, but I gotta go fix that real quick. But at the end of it, okay, we got DJ Shiny D joining us. Okay, DJ Shiny D, what up, though?
What up, though? How you doing
Not
on
much,
this
not
beautiful
much.
Friday?
Yes,
Beautiful
sir.
day.
Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. I should say, but not just. I just started the conversation up, so getting ready to check my audio and video in a second and make sure that everybody can hear me. Make sure that I'm clear and I can be heard correctly before we start up tonight's conversation. But what up, though, everybody on YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram? It's your boy Dame D. We got DJ Shiny D in the building. DJ Shiny D, go ahead and formally introduce yourself to the show while I check our audio and video.
All right. Well, I'm DJ Shawnee D. I'm a regular on the What Up Though show. New to Detroit, but fitting in just nicely. It's a beautiful day. I'm all grateful.
Man, you are a Detroiter now. You officially a Detroiter. You ain't new to the city no more. You down here for what, about 4 years now?
It'll be 4 years. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I
So
still
you
I
not
still
new.
need
But
GPS.
you say what now?
I say I still need GPS though. Oh, I'm sorry. Uh,
Right. But no, you can navigate throughout the city. But yeah, man, look, it's Freestyle Friday. We got DJ Shiny D that's gonna join the conversation. So you know how we do it over here on Freestyle Friday. We talk about multiple conversation, multiple topics, but today we're gonna start it off. We still gonna be talking about this Nolan Wells situation. In today's title, they still are trying to pull the wool over our eyes in front of us. You know what I mean? So what I mean by that is, man, it's been a lot of evidence, that's been presented um, to these investigators. It's been presented to the so-called grand jury that's getting ready to come up today, getting ready to pass a lot of this evidence that's getting ready to go over to him. DJ Shiny D, give me your thoughts, give me your opinion, and I will give you mine. I don't know how far you followed this case, but it's just been too much evidence that's been presented for, this case to have not been already passed over to the grand jury. But I think we're getting ready to head that way. But give me your thoughts, give me your opinion on this, DJ Sonny D, with all the evidence, and I'm getting ready to talk about some of the evidence that's been presented. That's really big evidence. There should be no doubt that this young man's life was taken without no accidental bullshit that they're trying to throw up. So go ahead, DJ Shiny D. Give us your thoughts on this whole Nolan Wells case.
Well, you gotta keep me abreast on if there's some new evidence. Is there something new going
Yeah, you kind of fade. You kind of fading in and out.
on? I don't know. Is
There
that
you go.
better?
That's perfect. Yep, that's a lot
Okay.
better.
Okay. You have to update me on something new that came out.
Okay, well, are you familiar with the young woman? And I don't want to tear her name up. I think it's Jeanette. Well, she was a voice analyzer, and she broke the foam call down. That remember the foam call that they originally when they thought the
Mhm.
boat was sinking. Well, she's a she's a she has the skills to be able to break what we could not be able to hear with our regular eyes down, and she did that. And there was a lot of evidence that went against them. I got audio and video, of that video, but let me make sure that I can be shown clearly too, LaShawn. She did that.
Okay.
And it was because I wanted before I play this video, if I'm not showing clear, let me make sure that video is not going to show clear, but I think it's kind of showing clear.
Okay.
But yeah, man, it was a video, like I said, not a video, but this voice
Audio.
analyzer, she broke down the phone call, and in this phone call, LaShawn, you can hear clearly in the background. You hear about 3 or 4 different voices in the background. They're like, is he dead? Is Nolan dead? They like, Nolan, wake up. They're like, he's dead.
Mhm.
And then they like, are we going to cover this up? So CBS, not CBS, but I believe NBC or one of the mainstream newscast medias, they came out, with their own version of this voice recording when they originally was on this boat, when this boat was supposedly sinking, and they're trying to tell us we didn't not hear what we wanted to hear. So if you want me to play this video first, and you can see it, and then we can you can give your comments on what you think you heard and what you saw from this video.
Okay.
And we'll go from there. So I got the video queued up. So give me 1 second. And this video I'm going to be showing. I'm going to give a shout out to Taylor Publishing House. This video, we're going to use this for entertainment and educational purposes only. But here we go. Here go the video right here, LaShawn. So let me know if you can see this video clearly, if it's coming out to you clear to you guys.
Yeah, I see it.
This one continues on throughout the call, and we're going to listen to that, and we're going to stop it at a certain point so we can pretty much point out
and there's 2 videos
what sounds like a clear murder cover up
that we're going to show. And this is the original video that the black young lady broke down and she showed to the world, and they tried to scrutinize her. They tried to they basically tried to say she didn't know what the fuck she was doing, or tried to discredit her, I should say. So this is we have a second video too after the first video that we're going to play that another voice analyst broke down. But here we go.
But just take a listen.
Hey, we're at the west tip of Horn, and our bilge pump stopped working. We're sinking. Can y'all please come? We have a membership. Shut the fuck up! What'd you say? Hey. It's coming up. We're just sinking. I don't know. Like we're going down now. I don't know the phone number. It's either Jerry Atkinson. I think it's Jerry Atkinson. Try that. I know we have a membership, like guaranteed. I don't have the tag on here. It got ripped off. Reach me at 2. What? Yeah, everybody's off the way. What? No, we do not need that. Let me go look. Will. Hey, North. All right, are you ready? North, 3 degrees. 46.72.
Yeah, right now they're doing a coordinate out to where they're so-called supposed to be sinking.
What do I need to send you? Yeah, what? Yeah, we do not have the VHS radio. Okay, my coordinates are 30 degrees by 14.684 north, and then west by 88 degrees by 46.79. Yes, we are at Horn Island. Yes. We were sinking, yes. Oh, we're not aground. We are in 17 foot of water. We're in 31 foot of water. I want to get this boat unsank and towed back, yes.
Okay, now
you can tow it to Ocean Springs or Fort Bayou launch.
He's still going to do a lot of talking, but so yeah, I'm going to fast forward to the second video.
And you see right.
Okay, so everyone thinks baked on grease needs
give me a
strong
second. I gotta
chemicals to
skip
get it
this.
off.
They will
But
put a commercial in. But that was the so
that's
was
a
you able
lie.
to see
All right,
the
not doing
reading and hear
anything
everything
special
clearly
here.
on
Just
that one, LaShawn?
Yeah, I
Right
hear you.
there, it said the first statement,
here's the
oh,
second.
is he actually dead?
Here's this. Here, I'm gonna rewind this a little bit more.
Yeah, thanks.
So if you listen to that, you realize that there's a lot of incriminating statements within that audio. Is he dead? I killed him. He's dead. Let's move him. He asked for it. Should I call the Navy? What did that mean? Many people feel like even the call between the young man and the CETO dispatch, they were speaking in code. Once again, that's a possibility because once again, no one knows what happened to Nolan and everybody is silent. And so for that to be possible, everybody has to be complicit because there's no way one of the lone Black people on that island could just disappear into thin air. But most of the incriminating statements happen at the beginning of the call. Let's go with real quick. And you see right there, it said the first statement, oh, is he actually dead? Are we going to cover it up? Yeah, I thought so. I thought about all of that. And then I was like, what? Oh, you killed him and you're going to have to pay for that. He's really dead? Yeah. He's dead? Yeah. I think he done. Nolan. Uh-oh, time to go. Oh my God. And you remember they said they left really quick when the boat was sinking. Maybe this is the reason why they left really quick. Y'all are dumb. Just stop talking to me. Everybody is definitely in a panic now.
Hey, we're at the.
I'm stupid. Now he starts talking to the operator. And you can tell even in this conversation, he is very distracted.
West tip of Horn, and our bilge pump stopped working. We're sinking. Can y'all please come?
We're seeking.
We have a membership.
He's not breathing. Get up, get the F up.
Shut the fuck up! Damn it, Bart.
Damn it, Bart. The infamous damn it, Bart. He has yet to respond to why they said damn it, Bart, though.
Okay, I'm gonna go. This was just to get you a little bit more knowledgeable on what's going on. So I'm gonna stop that, and we'll go ahead and do our commentary on that. So, what you heard from the video. So, were you able to hear everything somewhat clear? If not, were you able to see the wording that they put in there? If you were not able to hear the wording clearly?
Yeah. And to me, it's not really shocking because to me it was insulting to my intelligence for them to tell me that there's one boy who just died and didn't come home with the rest of them. Is really what we thought. We knew something happened. We knew what it was, and I think the audio just kind of points that out. And I think everybody, and all of this is still alleged. Nobody has been convicted of anything, but I think if this is found to be true, because I did see a video today where the Black lady that was the voice analyzer, where she kind of showed where she kind of took the voices out, the voices on top, so you can hear the background. And I think that if this is proven to be admissible to a court, anybody that's involved should do some time. Anybody.
Exactly. So this is why I label the title that they're trying to pull the wool over our faces in front of our eyes. It's because all this evidence that's been that has been presented, that has been shown. the problem is, they thought most of us would, watch this and forget about this case and let this situation be swept up under the rug, I should say. But I want to give a shout out to Willie D. I want to give a shout out to Taylor Public Housing, and people, like those guys, and myself. I've been on top of this case. I've been trying to talk about it and keep it alive that for people can see and hear about, what's been going on throughout the country and with this case. But yeah, they thought that most of us would hear about this case, forget about it, and therefore they can sweep this case up under the rug. But it's just been too much evidence, man. Let's talk about this autopsy. How they fucked up and they ruined the autopsy for the second secondhand autopsy to be done. They deliberately left out the throat. They deliberately left out the lungs. Therefore, we wasn't not able to tell, if this young man died or if he was strangled or whatnot. They deliberately did that. So we would not be able to, get the second autopsy done sufficient. So give me your thoughts on that, LaShawn, before we go further. Let me give me your thoughts on clearly how they fucked up the autopsy for the second autopsy to be done, so we couldn't prove, what clearly had happened to this young man.
Well, I just think that Nolan Wells' case is just one of many, and they have always kind of bent the rules to kind of favor their narrative of what happened. And like I said, I am, to me at this point, it's either got to be tit for tat or because they just think that they could just snatch our babies, kill our kids, and nothing is ever done to them. So this really doesn't seem to affect them until it happens to them, really.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, man, it's like they're trying to do this shit. And thank you, Melinda. I'm gonna read off a lot of the comments she just described. I've been trying to, just talk about this before I read out some of the comments. But yeah, man, the thing is they're trying to, discredit everyone who's been bringing formidable evidence, against this group, these so-called white friends of Nolan. The whole thing is, LaShawn, what people are feeling and realize, they're trying to figure out if this young man was killed on the boat or the island. The whole thing is fuck all that. It doesn't matter where he was killed at. This young man is dead. You know what I mean? And the whole thing is they're literally trying to cover this shit up. Like I said, they fucked up the autopsy for the second autopsy report was done, so it can come inclusive. So now it's been handed over. Hopefully it'll be going to the grand jury, which should have been to the grand jury already. With all this evidence coming forth. So really, man, what they're trying to do is they're trying to discredit everyone. And it's not just been black people. You've had Nancy Grace on the show, on shows, talking about this case. And normally she's on the other side, Sean. Give me your thoughts about that, man. Just on all this evidence that's been brought thus far. With how they fucked up the autopsy report. Nancy Grace talked about that. You got Willie D. You got a lot of black social media platforms that's talking about this case, keeping it alive, not allowing them to sweep this up under the rug. And I'll get back to the medical examiner after this question, after you answer this. But yeah, give me your thoughts on that, man. It's fucked up how they're trying to sweep this shit up under the rug, like we're not witnessing, what's going on, and now they're discrediting everybody who's brought formidable, like I said, information, like the divorce analyzer. It's like they're trying to tell us we didn't hear what the fuck we heard.
Yeah, but they always try to do that. To me, it's not even shocking anymore because this is their MO. This is what they do. They try to tell us that what we see or what we know to be true is not true when it comes to
that's crazy.
It is crazy, but it's not new. And like I said, there's always been a separate standard, a separate rules that we have to do for the same situation. It doesn't make sense that they are as lax about this case when there's a young man dead right now, and nobody seems to have a clear cut answer on what really happened to him. And
Exactly.
It's just no, I still don't even know why, and then you guys are blatantly lying. Blatantly lying. Why, first of all, why were you all drinking? You're not old enough to drink, but you guys were drinking on that boat. And
Yeah, and then
that's not
and
even
I'm
an
glad you
issue.
brought that up. Go ahead, LaShawn. Go ahead, keep talking.
Yeah, it just seems to me that whoever these young men's parents are, they got some connections, and they don't feel like their kids should have to go to jail for this. When they were clearly responsible. Even if you didn't kill him yourself, you're not calling anybody was neglectful. And so I think you all should be charged. You all are accessories.
Listen, and I'm glad you said that, and I don't want to lose my train of thought I was going to say, but look, once all this stuff is brought forth, and these young and these kids, I ain't gonna say children, but these motherfuckers are brought to justice. I think these parents should be held responsible too. Because they've helped them try to hide a lot of this evidence. But
Yeah.
let's go back to what we were saying, LaShawn. It's like they're almost like discrediting everyone who's bringing formidable evidence forward towards these guys. Like, listen, this isn't a phone call that we brought up. We've heard, this was something that they brought forward, and we just had people to analyze this and break this shit down. So basically what they're trying to say to us is we don't hear what the fuck happened. It's clearly these people, so-called friends, are on the boat. They're talking to Nolan. He's on that boat, and clearly he's not breathing. He's alive. They even talked about doing chest compressions. So that let you know that he was unresponsive. He was unaware. He wasn't he wasn't aware of what was going on. So basically at that time he was dead. So if we listen, LaShawn, if we allow, and what I mean by that, us the people, and it's not just the blacks, it's everybody, because at the end of the day, man, it's not us who's trying to make this thing a racial thing. It's really, most of these whites who've turned this into a racial situation. Only thing that I think most blacks and what this family, what this mother and father want is the truth. They want to be transparent. They want to know what happened to their son. So if we allow for this Mississippi, and we know it's an unjust system. The medical examiner down there is already under scrutiny for mislabeling. Most black deaths that come through her office. You know what I mean? Meaning that these so-called suicidal events that we're hearing about, these accidental drownings, these are a lot of these cases have been due, and happening due to the hands of these so-called white friends, LaShawn. So give me your opinion, give me your thoughts. Like I said, they're doing this shit in front of our face. They're trying to tell us we don't see what we hear what we hear. We didn't see what we saw. This young man was on that boat. We know he was unresponsive. We hear they're trying to give them chest compressions. We even hear them saying, is he dead or is he alive? From that alone, there should have been indictments. So look, if the shoe was on the other foot, and if it was Nolan, and if this was a white boy who died, and it was a boat full of black boys, and Nolan was one of the main characters, and he accidentally, and it was on the other shoe was on the other foot, I should say. Excuse me, I'm talking too fast. There would have been some indictments. Most of those guys would have been indicted. They would have been locked up until proven innocent. Give me your thoughts on that, LaShawn. If the shoe was on the other foot, do you think most of these guys, if they were black, and a white guy died, would they already have been indicted, and most of these guys would have been locked up, until someone spoke up?
Well, I think that we do see the situation flipped. And his name is Carmelo Anthony. And so, and he was put in jail immediately. So
Fact.
I'm like I said, we got an instance for that. So it just is to the
And still
point where
denied. And he's still denied. He's locked up. Okay, well they've already put him in jail. But yeah, that was a perfect example. But go ahead. It's like they're not. Go ahead, LaShawn.
no, like I said, I just think that At this point, it is what are we going to do about it? We keep having these conversations. We know what happens. We're smart enough to figure it out. We figured it out a month ago, earlier this month. So it's like, what are we gonna do about it? And I think that the only thing that we can do about it right now is make sure that whoever these parents are that are aiding and abetting these children from justice, we need to not spend another dollar with them, not another, because they don't understand protest. They don't understand, just spouting off at the mouth. They only understand money and livelihood. That's it. That's all.
Yeah, and like I said, at the end of the day, man, it's a clear cover up. They're doing everything possible. That they've sabotaged the autopsy. Therefore, the second autopsy cannot be, clearly done and clearly examined. They fucked that part up. They did not pass over, evidence to be examined. So therefore, it would be inconclusive for them to be able to complete this autopsy. They fucked that up. And then now, like I said, with all the evidence, and like I said, again, I want to give a shout out to everyone who's kept this case alive, who talked about that, and the two forensic voice analyzers who broke these situations down, because LaShawn, they could have done this shit, if they really wanted to hear what was going on that boat. We clearly hear what was going on this boat. Clearly this man was on the boat, he was dead, and the whole thing, they're trying to cover this situation up because of this, and I'm gonna say allegedly, because now they're trying to they've coming out with a lawyer, trying to scare everyone who's talking about this situation. They're trying to scare everybody with lawsuits, if we talk about that, but this whole thing is about Nolan and this so-called Katie woman that he was supposed to be, on the boat talking to, and it was supposed to be allegedly, Bart's girlfriend. And this is a prestige young man who's in college and looking to be, getting drafted, hopefully to the NFL. He was looking, and his dad and his grandfather also played collegiate, in the NFL, so they're really trying to cover up for this young man who done some shit, some fucked up shit. And you can hear from some of the voices what they were saying. Damn it, Bart, like Bart, so it sounds like, allegedly, some things was done to Nolan. And then from the original autopsy, the back of the head, the bruising. Are you familiar with what was said and what was showed on that original autopsy from the second autopsy, I should say?
Yeah.
LaShawn?
Yeah.
Yeah,
He had bruises
he
on
had
the neck.
bruises, so it looked like, yeah, that he may have either been forced down up underwater or something like that, or hit on the back of the head and knocked out, some things like that, so it's showing that, this young man, he was either held down or someone hit him or tried to choke him out, therefore that's why the throat was missing and things like that, so clearly, he has the state, these white boys has the state of Mississippi, working for them, along with their parents. So at the end of the day, like you said, I agree 100%, LaShawn. Once all this stuff comes to the forefront, these so-called friends are indicted. The parents need to be indicted along, right along with them. Because I guarantee you, a lot of evidence are going to come up through phone. Once a lot of these phone conversations and phone calls get indicted, they'll see that the parents had a lot to do with trying to help these kids cover up, especially the grandfather, because it was one of the young men that was on the boat. It was his grandfather's boat, and it was evidence that the grandfather actually called off one of the rescuers to come out there because they said that the boat wasn't sinking anymore. So how the fuck you go from sinking and 34 foot full of water to not sinking and not needing help anymore, LaShawn?
Yeah. I don't know. It's a blatant lie. It's the blatant cover up. And the thing about it is the kids didn't handle it right because they're kids. And then the parents tried to come in with the cover up. So we know what it is,
Exactly.
and we don't need a voice analyst to tell us what happened. We know it because we've seen it before. I think about like the past and how many things that um racists got away with with putting us in jail and framing us for stuff. And this is no different. There's really no
at
difference.
all.
And it's still the same MO with them. They think that they can do whatever, and especially when it comes to races and alcohol. And they get real charged up, especially when they're around a group of their own. That's why it's just not safe for us to go anywhere with them by ourselves, period. Because when they
Yeah,
get together, they mob up, especially when there's alcohol involved, you know.
yeah, and I've been
Mm,
talking about that for multiple cases that we've talked about when you had situations where you had blacks dying, hanging out with their white friends. You don't hear about that when it's on the when it's on the other shoe, when the shoe is on the other foot, I
mm,
should say. When you have
mm.
white that's hanging out with their black friends, we kind of overly protect them to make sure that they get home safe. We're not hearing that, throughout the country when you have blacks that's in the company or hanging out with their so-called white friends. We've talked about case over case over case. We just talked about a case, and I don't even know if you're familiar with that. But it was a young man who was just recently drowned. It was two white boys. They took him
Mm.
out in the middle of a lake and drowned him, tried to cover it up, hid his phone, hid his clothes, and things like that. And it still took them forever to indict these white boys. You know what I mean? So we've been hearing multiple case after case after case after case. And it's not a coincidence, LaShawn. It's an epidemic. Especially with all these hangings that we've talked about throughout the country. Give me your thoughts on that. We've talked about multiple hangings, and it's not just been men; it's been females. You had Tania Miller. This was a young woman out of Michigan. She's from where we're from. She went down to Florida, to celebrate Juneteenth. They found her the day before Juneteenth on the 18th, hanging from a tree. So give me your thoughts on that. This is not a coincidence. This has been an epidemic that's been going on. We have to continue talking about that and doing our due justice. So give me your thoughts, on what we've been hearing and seeing throughout the country with all these deaths, with these hangings, these drownings, and black folks basically, with their white so-called friends.
Well, like I said, I'm kind of tired of talking about it. I mean, because it's the same MO that we overly protect white people when they're with us because we want them to have a good time, but we at some point have to stop being so trusting and stop putting their feelings above our own. Like even with Nolan was a child. He probably, had no idea that something like this or somebody has some animosity towards him. But it just goes to show you how little they have respect for our lives, period, as human beings. They don't even see us as equal. So they think that they can just do whatever they want and there are no consequences, or they could get somebody to hide the consequences. And why? Because they have been successful in the past at covering up stuff.
See,
So it has to come to
yeah,
a
and that's what
point.
the fuck is going on down there in Mississippi.
Yeah, we got to stop allowing this bullshit to go. Like it's not just Nolan. We got to stop until there's a conclusion. We got to keep up with it. We got to be in these lawmaker spaces. We've got to, make sure we got good attorneys on this. And even if we have to all donate so that people can have attorneys, then we just have to donate. I donated to Nolan Wells Defense Fund. I did. I mean to
Yeah, and I
Carmelo
agree with you.
Anthony.
And I'm gonna read off a few comments at Cadillac 7076 6. She said, "Do justice ain't talking about it." I agree. But at some point you have to talk about it. You have to make the people aware of what's going on, and those who's not about talking about it, they got to go out there and make it happen. So, but at a point, man, we definitely got to stop talking about it. We got to make things happen. I agree with you 100 100%. We definitely have to do something about it. At the end of the day, that's why I say we cannot allow them to pull this wolf, over our face, because other than that, man, we're just a bunch of talk. That's it. We'll get up there, we'll march in Al Sharpton, we'll march in Crump, and they may get a little money out of this situation, because I've heard already, that they got lawsuits and all that stuff going on. But at the end of the day, a young man life was taken. So at the end of the day, we've been seeing this throughout the country. They even had another young man up there on the stage the other day whose life was taken. So pretty much, man, if we allow for this bullshit to go on, at the end of the day, man, we're just all talk, and that's it. If we allow this bullshit to continue, keep going on without, some due justice, and sometimes we got to take justice, into our own motherfucking hands. If we continue to keep coming up missing, and we're in the presence of our white friends, then what the fuck do that tell you, LaShawn?
Right. I just think at this point, segregation is not so bad, and I keep saying that. Right, it's not so bad. I know that we want to be diverse, and we don't want our kids not knowing other sides and stuff. But when it comes down to going somewhere without me, where I can't control the situation, or then you can't go. You just can't go, and it's a shame that we have to teach our kids that. We think that, okay, it's 2026. Our kids should be able to hang out with whoever they want to, but that's not the case. And we're not that far off from all the racism before the civil rights, all of that. But these people it's embedded in their fabric, and you just you can't trust when people have hate and their rearing and their child rearing.
Yeah,
So
and I'm gonna just be honest, man. All that shit is learned behavior. And it's something that's been passed on generation to from generation. I'm gonna try to read a few of the comments. Let me go back to this one right here. Because there's been quite a few. And what up, though, James Sanders? I've been meaning to say that he's been making a few comments. He said those morons are sending scare tactics and threatening people about the boys, are going to sue people, including Ben Crump and Al Sharpton, because of the situation is messing up the boys' lives. I agree. And that's something we talked about. The whole thing is this young man has a promising, career, in the NFL. He's a punter, and he's been getting looked at, so they're trying to definitely protect this young man. He's definitely coming from, a prestige family. So we see the cover up, and we see that the state of Mississippi, is doing everything in their power to try to help this family. So at the end of the day, man, it's going to take us. Go ahead, LaShawn.
Let me ask you this. Do you think that
Go ahead.
There are some whites that raise their children to hate blacks? And do you think that there are most black people raise their children to fear whites?
I'm gonna say I agree with you. With the most whites raise their children to hate blacks, and I'll disagree. I think most blacks teach the same. I'm gonna think most blacks teach their kids to love everyone, to see pretty much no color. Because I'm gonna just be honest. Growing up, my mom or my dad really didn't talk about the injustice or what was going on between whites and blacks. They didn't teach us. So therefore, they really didn't teach, us to hate whites, because they really didn't talk about it. And I'm gonna be honest, they really didn't talk about the differences between white or blacks, because we were that type. My parents, and I'm just going to say our peoples, were not that type of people to be breeding violence or thinking, violence against, another group of people, or teaching hatred towards our kids. So no, I'm gonna say most blacks don't sit up and teach their kids things like that.
I didn't say hate.
Well, not hate, but racial things. Racial hate. Because it's a racial hate that whites teach their kids towards us.
Yeah, to fear
What
white
fear?
people.
I'm gonna say no. I'm gonna say most blacks don't fear whites. We mostly fear the police because of what the fuck they can do with them guns. You know, because if it wasn't for them guns that the police carry around and what they can do, you know, we would not have no fear for them. So I'm gonna say no. We don't really
But
fear
it's
them.
not we don't teach our kids to fear black police. It's white police.
But yeah, but to answer your question, I don't think we teach our kids to fear whites though.
I think when we teach our kids, okay, well, you gotta do this when the police pulls you over. You can't, be out here with a hood on at night. You can't be walking up and down the street. We do teach our kids
Right. Well, that's just teaching
that,
your kids common sense of
but that's
trying to,
fear.
stay alive
But that don't
from the
instill
police.
fear. That don't instill fear.
No, I'm not going to say that in fear is fear. You know, that's just that just installs intelligence, you know, in your kid from when they come across a police officer that may be on some bullshit. You know,
Mhm.
so you're equipping them, you know, with the knowledge that they may need to when they encounter a racist motherfucker or a black police officer there I should say. You know,
Well,
so no, I'm gonna say
what would
most
happen?
blacks.
What would happen
Go ahead.
if we start teaching our kids weapon safety or how to fight, or you know what I
I
mean,
mean, we should
or
have been teaching our kids. Our counterparts are doing that. We should have been teaching our kids safety and how to fight. You know, because let me tell you this: our counterparts, you know, they're teaching their kids once they're able to hold the gun, how to shoot, how to reload, and all that. You know, we should be teaching our children that too. You
for
know, because
sure.
a lot of us talk about a civil war, this, that, and the other. But you know, at the end of the day, you know, us as a group, you know, we are not ready for that yet. You know, therefore, you know, we got to continue. You know,
We got
just
to get
really, man,
ready.
just trying to build as one. Yeah, and get ready, you know, and that's what I mean is we got to continue trying to build as one, trying to raise up some black power with, you know, some of this black economics that, you know, that we have that we can put together, you know, at the end of the day, because that's what's really going to make these motherfuckers respect us is a little bit of this black economics, you know, and then at the other day, like I said, sometimes, you know, and I am not trying to promote violence, you know, but, you know, at the end of the day, man, if we continue to come up missing, you know, and we know it's due to the hands of these so-called whites, man, what the fuck is that telling us? You know, we have to meet, and what that is telling us, we have to maybe start taking a little bit of justice into our own motherfucking hands, you know, because as we see with this Carmelo Anthony case, as we see with this Nolan Wells case, they are not going to get justice for us. You know, at the end of the day, it's up to us to get justice for ourselves. These white folks is not going to give us justice. You see what they're trying to do. They're doing everything in their motherfucking power to try to keep these white boys from not facing prosecution, LaShawn.
Mm. Yep, and they don't think because they don't think that they did anything wrong, and that's the problem. It was an accident as far as they
Yeah.
concerned. You know what I mean? And so
Listen.
that's the problem. The problem is you feel like the laws don't follow you or they don't affect you if it's your child. But if it was our child
No,
that
what it
had
is,
did
and
something,
I'm not going to
yeah.
disagree with you, but I think they feel like they got the privilege. They think they got the white privilege to go to be above the motherfucking law when it pertains to them. When it's dealing with, you know, a black person's life, you know, so they
Mm,
feel like they above the law when it's coming to, you know, coming to when they have to come to justice for taking a black man or woman's life. You know, they feel
yeah.
like that they are above that.
And then they got the nerve to
And
be
that
now
Tommy
threatening.
Antoine said, he said Nolan Wells was choked on was on coke and alcohol. You know, where do you get this stupid ass motherfucking shit from, man? You know, they didn't even. I don't even think they announced that in an autopsy report. You know, we know this young man was not on coke. You know, more than likely they all probably was drinking alcohol. What teenagers do not do that in a situation? You know, they were on the 4th of July. You know, they on a boat having a good time. Most of them were coming home from college. So yeah, we expected them to be out there on the boat, you know, even drinking, you know, but I don't give a fuck. What if they was out there on coke? You know, this young man did not deserve to motherfucking die. That's the thing that we talking about, you know. So this kills me when you got motherfucking white boys that come over here and say stupid fuck shit like that. Even if he was on coke, did he deserve to die?
Right. Yeah. And he
You know, so
probably
answer that. You know, and I'll even bring your motherfucking ass up here. Send your put your email in the comment and I'll bring you up.
They not gonna come
You know,
up.
and he said Ben Crump is a clown. You know, man, the only thing Ben Crump is trying to do is trying to bring awareness to what happened to this young man's family. He's trying to get justice. You know, but at the end of the day, I agree with you. They're trying to overlook, they're trying to cover this shit up, LaShawn. And if we allow for this shit to happen and these young people, these motherfucking so-called friends don't get indicted, LaShawn, then we definitely have to start taking justice into our own hand, because this is basically letting us know and letting us see that, you know, they don't give a fuck about, you know, what evidence that we've brought to the forefront. You know, because there's been too much evidence. We know that this young man was on a boat with these same so-called white friends. We hear it. You know, we hear them calling this young man name out. Nolan, is he dead? You know, so if that alone cannot be brought into evidence, LaShawn, then, you know, it's a problem going forward here in the United States, you know, when it's dealing pertaining to blacks and whites in America.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, whoever just made that statement, you know, they have a right to voice their opinion too. And so I will accept it. You know, but I do not agree with you. I've never heard anything about him being on coke or anything like that. And I just think that, you know, that was kind of awful for you to say. It's just unfortunate that there are always going to be people, because they're sending death threats to the voice analyst. They're sending death threats to the mother.
Yeah, you know, and
You
did
know what I
not once
mean?
did I say any of these
But
white boys was on coke or was drinking
how can you
or was
say
drinking, I should say.
that you love God? How could you say that you love humanity if you'll make a statement like that? It's
Yeah, you
unfortunate.
know, most of these motherfuckers say they love God, you know, and do the most killing across this
They
fucking
have no
country, or
idea
well, across
who
this
God
world.
is.
You know,
They
so
don't
we
know who
you
God
know,
is.
that's the conversation, you know, when we're talking about God and them, you know, but most of them that say that is most of them are the ones that's doing most of the killing, you know. But at the end of the day, man, that's what it's about, you know. And you hear the racist comments coming out, LaShawn, you know, talking about this young man was on coke, and like you said, you're right, everyone has a right to their opinion, you know, but for him to come in and say some shit like that he has no fact or no facts have come out that's saying that, you know, this young man was on coke. But even if he was on motherfucking heroin, you know, he did not deserve to die. You know what I mean? So, you know, you're not gonna, you know, and that's what they try to do. They try to, what's the word that I'm looking for? They'll try to,
Gaslight.
yeah, and throw some other bullshit in there and trying to get off of what really happened to this young man. This young man died, you know, and like I said, if the shoe was on the other foot, it would be a motherfucking travesty. You know, it would be the end of the day. They would be they would be doing everything in their power trying to figure out what happened to this young man if he was a white boy, you know. And that's all, you know, that we're saying. You know, we just want justice, even if this was a white boy and these were just white boys, and it just was an all white case. You know, at the end of the day, most black folks would still be interested, you know, in what's going on, and they would still just want justice for the young man that died, and that's it. You know, it's you whites that's trying to make it a racial thing. You know, most blacks are not even looking at it like this. We just want justice because, you know, here and as we see throughout history, we have not been getting justice on situations like this. You know, we can talk about a lot of cases that's been unjust, you know, in the state of Mississippi.
Yeah. Yeah, it's unfortunate. And it's unfortunate that they get mad at us, you know, for trying to defend ourselves or trying to advocate for ourselves. You know, they think that they all of a sudden become victims after a while. And I think that that's unfortunate. It always shocks me on why they don't see it. Like, you know, to me
Listen, they
it's
always talk
blatant.
about how about black on black crime. Not to cut you off, sorry about that. But
That's
this
right.
at Tommy Antoine, this he's definitely a racist motherfucker. You know, but yes, we talk about black on
Ooh.
black crime over here on the What Up Though. So, but look, speaking of that, I need for you guys to make sure you hit that subscribe button coming in. We are less than 30 subscribers away from 1K. We are right there. We are knocking that door down. So I need for you guys to like, comment, subscribe, and share. But yeah, it's people like Tommy, Antoine, that give a bad name for the good white folks that come in here. I'm not even say come in here, but that's that's talking about this situation throughout the company. Throughout the country. It's clearly evidence showing that these motherfuckers murdered this young man. Only thing that we're talking about is the evidence is there. What's holding the prosecutors and a grand jury from indicting these boys, trying to get some type of clarity or bringing these young men to justice.
And I think that that's only fair. And I don't understand why they don't understand. But it's cool though. Feel the way you want to feel. But
you know why they don't
'cause
understand? And hold your thought. You know why they don't understand? I'm gonna read this comment. And I'm at World Treacherous Ministries. He made this comment. And I don't know if he meant it towards us, but I think that's kind of what we were trying to say. They are not true Christians. Love, righteousness, and justice. Right? Because true Christians would not be coming up here saying this fuck shit. And true Christians do not go out and murder, steal, or kill. And and a lot of you guys' ancestors been doing that. To our people throughout. Throughout our lifetime in this country, and that's a fact.
Yeah. It's just, what? Go ahead. They want to get us riled up, but y'all not smart enough to get us riled up. Sorry.
He said, Tommy, see, and there's another comment. Tommy Antoine said, prove they killed him. His so-called friends motherfucking proved they killed him from that conversation on that motherfucking boat. That proved they killed him. That man, it proved that he was dead. They said, is he dead? Go listen to the conversation. So you got motherfuckers like this, LaShawn, and I hate, and I'm not trying to cut you off, but this motherfucker keep making comments. I don't have to prove it. The evidence is going to prove it. The friends already said it. It's just that this so-called white privilege is holding back, from not bringing these young men to justice. That's what's going on. Because if it was some black guys, they definitely would have been indicted. But go ahead, LaShawn.
No, like I said, and I expect that from people that sit and computer pimp, thinking they hard on computers and stuff, but they not gonna come out and say it. They won't join the show and say it.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Hey,
So
he got a great I'm about to show that. He said, how about white on white crime? Exactly. And it's more that goes on throughout the country than black on black crime. The difference is they just broadcast and they show it on social media and mainstream media, I should say, to make it look like it's a lot of black on black crime, but it's mainly a lot of white on white crime. They just don't put it out on the mainstream media, and thank you at World Outreach Ministries, and that's a fact.
What did she say?
No, I'm showing the comment right there. They were saying, they was like, basically, what about white on white crime? Because this stupid ass racists keep coming in there talking about black on black crime. And the thing is, we talk about black on black crime. We talk about just crime in general. But this situation, we're talking about unjust crime that's trying to go on, that your peoples is trying to get away with, and it's been like that since the beginning of the time down there in Mississippi, and it's just, this is not a new situation that's happening. This is an ongoing situation, and we're going to continue. We're going to continue to keep talking about these cases. It's been multiple cases since this young man has died, LaShawn, that's the young men and women has lost their life, in situations when you have blacks in the company of their white friends, so yeah, what's up with that? And it's really not an ongoing situation. This has been a situation that's been going on, for years. It's just been brought to the mainstream media. Talk about the situation when you had the black girl who had a sleepover with her so-called white friends. They were drinking. They found this young black woman dead the next day. So what's going on throughout the country with black people hanging out with their white friends and they're dying?
I mean, to me, you shouldn't be hanging out with your white friends, not by yourself. I don't know what else anybody should have to tell you. Stop trusting these people. I mean, you go back.
But we trying to give these motherfuckers a benefit of the doubt.
When you go back in time, you can see that white people really can't be trusted. So I don't know why we would start trusting them now. You know what I mean? And why are we trusting them? And that's the thing. Like every other civilization has been very trusting. and they have allowed these white people to come into their tribes and to their communities, and they bring disease, they pillage, they rape, they, so I just think that, white people should be studied.
See, and what's so crazy out of all the shit you just said, most races have still allowed themselves to allow for whites to come in. We still we still allowed ourselves to love them, to be friends with them, and all that. After all the raping, the killing, the pillaging, that was done to not just blacks, but throughout history. But mainly we're
I
talking
mean, but
about blacks, but just all the horrible shit that they done to our peoples and our ancestors, and the things that still go on throughout this country to this day.
well, I mean, but who other than racist whites? We're not gonna say all whites,
No, and that's
but
not what we're saying. Not
racist
all
whites.
whites. That's a fact.
But racist whites, who has done more damage to this world and to civilization than them?
Right. And that's a
Nobody.
fact. But that racist motherfucker won't answer that question. I guarantee you that. Ask him that same question again, LaShawn. I
He's
guarantee
okay
you he
with
won't
it,
answer
but
that.
he's okay. He's okay with being racist because it's in his fabric. It's in the fabric of his being. It's in his DNA, and that's okay because he's gonna have to answer to God for that, to the real God, not the one he served. So his time is coming. It's not for me to judge, but I tell you what, that it's gonna take more than that to get me riled up, Tommy, or whatever your name is. That ain't
Yeah,
enough.
he's a racist fuck,
Yeah,
and I
you're
and I
not
love
smart.
reading out, comments
And
like
and
that.
I like it.
Just
I like it when they come out like
yeah,
that
I love it.
because
I
yeah,
love it.
let's go. Like
Yeah,
let's go.
I love it when they show
Mhm.
the race, when they show their racism and they bring that shit out. Because it shows most of the people, how most and I'm not gonna say most, but how these racist whites are, and when they come out, it shows their true colors. Because you don't have black people on here talking this same bullshit. We're just really trying to talk facts and stating facts. This young man lost his life. He was on a boat with his so-called white friends, and it's probably due to his so-called white friends. You hear the shit that's going on the boat. I don't know why these white so-called racist motherfuckers on here won't acknowledge, and they trying to make it seem like this young lady added this shit in. These are original voice analyzers who broke this shit down. So you hear what clearly happened. You hear this young man was on that boat. They were trying to actually resuscitate him. That didn't happen. You heard what the young lady said. Didn't we do that already? So are we going to try to cover this up? So clearly, it's a cover up. What goes on in the dark eventually will come to the light. If it doesn't come out in our lifetime, eventually it will come out. But at the end of the day, we know what happened to this young man. I pray and I hope that his family get justice for him. Sean, what else is on your mind? We're not going to keep beating this up with the back. We'll move on to the next conversation. But if you have anything else on your mind, let's talk about it.
And you know what? I don't. I'm just healing from knee surgery. So,
How that's
just
been going?
hey, it's been all right. Just not being at work is a
Okay, well
beautiful
that's a
thing.
good thing. That's a good thing.
Yep.
Well,
And you've
I've
been
been
off
off of
too.
work for over a month, getting ready to go back Monday.
Yep. Are you ready?
Yeah, I'm actually ready. I've been off for a month. You think that you be wanting all that time off, but after a month being off and and sitting around, at the end of the day, you really be ready to go back and you just ready to get back to that real money because that unemployment money ain't shit compared to, the money that we're
Yeah.
normally used to getting.
No, it's not. But I'm gonna tell you something. I'm gonna enjoy this time.
No, enjoy it while you got it. You're not working in the heat. We had,
No.
one thing I will say about that, we had pretty much one of the hottest months of the year off, the month of July off. So,
Yeah.
hopefully this month of August will be cool, and it'll lead us off into the fall and we'll have a good fall and we'll have a good rest of the year from there.
Yeah. For sure. For sure. But other than that, I ain't got a whole lot going on for real. That's it.
Okay,
Just trying
okay.
to
Well, yeah,
stay
man.
safe.
I just want to come on and talk about this situation, for a little bit, because they got us fucked up, LaShawn. They got us misconstrued, if they think that they're going to allow us to have us thinking that we didn't hear what the fuck we think we heard on that tape, and we're going to allow this shit, the wolf to be pulled over our eyes in front of our face. It's some bullshit what they're doing to this family. It's some bullshit what the medical examiners have done down there in Mississippi. It's some bullshit what these so-called friends have done to this young man, trying to cover and hide this situation up. At the end of the day, man, I'm going to keep continuing to talk about this situation, until justice has been brought to this young man and his family. So LaShawn, I want to thank you for coming on. And I need for you guys to like, comment, subscribe, and share. We are less than 35 subscribers away. Your boy been knocking on the door. We are finally there. So I need for you guys to hit that subscribe button. I cannot do it without you guys hitting it. And make sure that you like and you share so this can get out and it can be prevalent and more people can see this. But LaShawn, let everybody know what you got going on and where they can reach you.
You can reach me on the What Up Though show every Friday nights. I am here. DJ Shawnee D at Facebook, DJ Shawnee D at Instagram. Come here for all your shea butter, your eczema needs. I got you.
There we go. And again, I want to thank DJ Shawnee D for coming on, giving us her insight on this Nolan Wells case and just giving us a good conversation and good talk. Because at the end of the day, I think what most blacks want, man, and I'll get my last word, most blacks just want justice for this young man's mother, for his mother and his father, because we see the hurt in this in his mother's eyes. She wants justice. What mother wouldn't want justice after losing their son? So at the end of the day, we just want what's right. We want to see this young man get justice, and that's it. Whether it has to do with these white boys going to jail or not, whether they were white or black or purple, we just want justice for this young man, and that's it. So we're going to keep talking about it. We're going to keep bringing this to the forefront, and like I said, we've had multiple cases like this that's been happening throughout the country. This has just been a case that's been highlighted, and we're going to stick with it. We're going to see it out until it's over with. So look, I want to thank everybody who made a comment, and I want to thank everybody who subscribed, and please continue to hit that subscribe button and continue to put them comments down there. I would love to hear your thoughts and your opinion on on this case, man. It's been a case that's pretty much, and that's dealing with this Carmelo Anthony case. We had these two cases that's divided this country in half racially. So look, put your comments. I definitely want to hear your comments. I would love to hear your thoughts on this situation. It's another one. It's your boy Dame D, and we are out. Peace.